Game of Thrones. During the fourth episode of Game of Thrones' eighth and final season, the majority of the show's characters found themselves celebrating their victory against the army of the dead at Winterfell in a raucous party scene filled with drinking games, dirty jokes, and even a marriage proposal. As Jon Snow is venerated by his friends for his valiant efforts during the Battle of Winterfell and Daenerys watches, a coffee cup is clearly visible on the table in front of her, sticking out like a sore thumb among mugs of ale, goblets of wine, and other medieval-style props typical of Thrones' time and style. Naturally, fans didn't let this pass quietly, and they stormed the internet to make a million Starbucks jokes, and even the cast got in on the joke. HBO, for their part, released a jokey statement about the mistake, but went on to digitally remove the cup from the episode. Throughout the series' run, Game of Thrones viewers have watched Daenerys Targaryen pick up titles, amass armies, free the downtrodden, and experience enormous overall character growth as she evolves from a meek, naive child bride to one of the most powerful players in the Seven Kingdoms. As she fights her way to the Iron Throne, Daenerys learns new traditions from the different tribes and people she encounters along the way, and one of them has to do with her hair and its very specific styling. Thanks to Daenerys' first love, Khal Drogo, one of Daenerys' signature traditions is to keep her hair long and continue to add complicated braids to her updos. Braids indicate battle victories for the Dothraki, and long hair means you haven't yet been defeated by your enemies. With that many braid wigs laying around, it's probably hard to keep track, and sharp-eyed viewers caught a rare wig error during the first episode of Thrones' 8th season. As Daenerys rides into Winterfell alongside Jon Snow, her wig visibly changes, displaying a totally different braid style between two quick shots. Daenerys' hair is a pretty important symbol, but sometimes even the crew probably has trouble remembering which wig goes on when. That many wigs would make anyone go a little crazy. Throughout 8 seasons, fans have become quite familiar with Game of Thrones sets and various locations. Since the beginning, the show has made use of incredible natural beauty across the world to bring the Seven Kingdoms to life. From quiet shores in Spain to the rolling green hills of Northern Ireland, snowy spots in Iceland, and ancient Croatian cities, Thrones has utilized some of the most gorgeous places on Earth to serve as stand-ins for these fantastical locations. These incredible filming locations give the show a sense of enormous scale and richness that digital effects alone would never create. As the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, King's Landing is one of the grandest locations on the show, positioned as a large city that sits directly on the sea. Even though it gets a digital makeover every time it shows up, that city is actually a real place. Thrones set their King's Landing scenes in the real city of Dubrovnik, Croatia, known as the Jewel of the Adriatic, which now draws hordes of visitors every year thanks to its prominent screen time on the show. For the vast majority of that screen time, the gates of King's Landing looked out on a green pastoral space. And then in Season 8, it looked a little drier. Yeah, it took on a totally new look with an expanse of flat, empty desert stretching out from the capital. If viewers had never seen the gates before, this might make some sense, but considering that audiences have spent plenty of time looking at King's Landing, this continuity error is especially jarring. The coffee cups spotted during Season 8's The Last of the Starks inspired plenty of jokes, but thanks to long hours and grueling shoot schedules, there's bound to be plenty of coffee cups laying around Thrones' set, and most people don't know that this wasn't even the first errant cup to be spotted on the series. During Season 4, Episode 2, The Lion and the Rose, which focused almost entirely on an ill-fated royal wedding, a behind-the-scenes shot of the Lannister clan catches Jaime Lannister clutching a coffee cup of his own. Fortunately, this blunder wasn't nearly as bad as the internet made it out to be. Since the scene was part of a behind-the-scenes featurette that didn't make it to the episode, it didn't attract as much attention as Daenerys' cup of herbal tea in Season 8. But it still goes to show that there are plenty of caffeine habits waiting to slip up the stars on the set of Game of Thrones. The opening credits of Game of Thrones have been lauded for their well-designed, imaginative take on the series, giving fans plenty of Easter eggs throughout the years, as well as spotlighting each location prominently featured in each season. After years of moving across the Seven Kingdoms with stylized, moving models of each major city or location popping up to show where fans might find their favorite characters this time, the Season 8 title sequence changed considerably, focusing on the North and King's Landing as the massive war between the two factions of Westeros draws to a bloody close. Another little detail during the opening credits is the fact that each actor bears a sigil next to their name in the credits identifying their House of the Seven Kingdoms, from Starks to Targaryens to Lannisters. But every now and then in the early seasons, someone would end up identified with the completely wrong house. Maybe the showrunners hadn't quite figured out how the credits would work yet, but during the first season, Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa Stark, was suddenly a Targaryen. Emilia Clarke, who plays Daenerys Targaryen herself, ended up marked as a Lannister, and Ian Glenn, who plays Daenerys' faithful right-hand man Jorah Mormont, was also apparently a secret Lannister. This show does have a lot of characters to keep track of, but these particularly obvious gaffes probably could have been avoided. It's worth noting that these mistakes have apparently been remedied since they first showed up. One of the most serious afflictions in Thrones lore is known as grayscale, a super contagious virus-like disease that turns human skin into a stone-like substance and makes the victim both unrecognizable and insane. Spread by touch, grayscale is notorious and deeply feared. Even when the spread of it can be stopped, as it was for Shireen Baratheon, most of Westeros agrees that grayscale is incurable and must be quarantined. Even though the audience learns later that you can apparently just cut it all off and be perfectly fine. But nobody knew that during the show's 5th season, as Jorah Mormont and Tyrion Lannister travel through ancient Valyria to track down Daenerys. While floating into the city on their boat, they encounter a group of violent men all afflicted with serious grayscale.
Stone men! Don't let them touch you!
Although Tyrion escapes their clutches, Jorah ends up with a patch of grayscale on his wrist and resigns himself to a slow death during which he'll never touch another person. A short while later, however, when Jorah and Tyrion have met up with Daenerys in the fighting pits of Meereen, Jorah straight up takes Daenerys' hand to save her life. Since he still has grayscale at this point, he could have transmitted the disease and killed her simply by touching her. After taking great care to illustrate that Jorah can't touch anyone at all so as not to infect them, this seems like a pretty massive oversight even in the middle of a tense battle scene. Game of Thrones is no stranger to huge battle set pieces, and Season 6's The Battle of the Bastards, a long-awaited showdown between Jon Snow and Ramsay Bolton, was no exception, pitting the underdog Stark family against the sadistic Bolton clan. Considered one of the best episodes of the entire series, The Battle of the Bastards combined an incredibly choreographed and gorgeously shot battle sequence with real emotional heft and an incredibly satisfying ending. Goodbye, Ramsay. It's no surprise that fans and critics alike venerated the popular episode, which scooped up a whopping 7 Emmy Awards in categories that included writing and directing. Fans were thrilled to see Jon charge into righteous battle with his sword Longclaw, but in one particular shot, something seems to be a little wrong with the blade. As Jon jumps onto his horse to enter the fray, his sword literally bends, making it obvious that Kit Harington was outfitted with a rubber sword for this particular shot. Jon probably won't take down any enemies with this, but it at least gave viewers a good laugh after the episode aired.
This is Valyrian steel.
During the show's 3rd season, Jon Snow infiltrates a group of wildlings only to fall in love with Ygritte, a fierce, fire-haired warrior who spends most of her time telling Jon Snow how much he knows.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Eventually, Ygritte falls hard for Jon in return, and the two of them set out to scale the wall and make their way into Westeros with a few other wildlings. Though Jon eventually returns to the Night's Watch, betraying Ygritte, she still can't bring herself to kill him, and eventually dies in his arms when the wildlings stage an attack on the Night's Watch, leaving Jon feeling pretty dang sad at the loss of his first love. Ygritte and Jon are still pretty hot and heavy by the time they reach the top of the wall along with a few other wildlings, and as they look out at the green landscape of Westeros, they kiss passionately, elated by their achievement. However, their kiss is so powerful it apparently knocks any other wildlings right back off the wall they just climbed, since everybody else vanishes by the end of the shot. Wanting some privacy for such an epic romantic moment is understandable, but that's just taking it too far. On a huge show like Thrones, there's bound to be some prop accidents, especially when a lot of the props involved are enormous metal swords meant to look as menacing as possible. As with all fantasy series, swords carry a lot of weight, with characters gifting, naming, and gushing over specific weapons that travel throughout the show. A perfect example is Ned Stark's sword, Ice, which is melted down after his execution and made into 2 new swords named Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. Needless to say, swords on the show are treated with all kinds of respect, but sometimes extras might have a little trouble managing these massive weapons. As Ser Barristan Selmy is unwillingly discharged from the Kingsguard during the first season, there's a tense moment in which it looks like Ser Barristan might try to start a fight. Fortunately, the moment is diffused without bloodshed and Barristan storms off into retirement, at which point all the guards sheath their swords in one smooth motion like the pros they are. Well, almost all of them put their swords back. One of the extras has some trouble getting his sword back into his sheath, which, embarrassingly for that extra, ended up making it into the final cut. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about Game of Thrones are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.